Welcome. I'm so delighted to be here with you today to moderate our first panel on participatory learning, making and tinkering. They're tinkering with their chairs. What a great topic to start the day. I'm Joan Lippincott from the Coalition for Networked Information, C&I, a joint program of the Association of Research Libraries and EDUCAUSE. I'm going to provide a brief introduction and then turn things over to our panelists to make remarks, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Participatory learning, what's that about? For me, it emphasizes two important aspects of the learning process, which many educational researchers say leads to deeper learning. They are, first, active learning, doing, not just passively absorbing the content of a subject, and second, the notion that learning is a social process. It may be a group like this one engaged in solving problems together, or it may be a person in your community using library facilities and technologies to hold a video conference with someone from the State Environmental Agency. Some public libraries have benefited from IMLS and MacArthur Foundation funding to develop learning labs, as Robin mentioned. You can see that developing skills with new technologies is an integral part of these programs. These students are engaging in active social learning activities. This fits with the library ethos of providing both equipment and access to expertise to anyone in the community and helps level the playing field in terms of barriers to access to technology due to economic factors. Today, some of our presenters will be describing 3D printers and other technologies often found in makerspaces. Some artists are using these technologies to produce exquisite new forms of art, like this visual representation of Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, one of my favorite new examples. The profession will benefit from library and iSchools like Syracuse, which offer studio environments where students are encouraged to expect the unexpected, collaborate, be inspired by adversity, and color outside the lines. Some libraries create active learning environments uniquely suited to their mission, such as this student startup exchange at Georgia Tech. Note the clear connection they make with library resources, encouraging students to use resources for market and patent research and multimedia development. Recently, I observed an Arduino workshop at a library. It's an open source electronics platform intended for people building interactive projects and one of the kinds of things sometimes included in makerspaces. Whether your user community consists of children, teens, college students, adults of working age, or seniors, or all of these, we are all creating our digital futures, and libraries have a strong role to play. Our panelists this morning are Bill Derry from the Westport Library, Todd Colegrove from the University of Nevada, Reno, and Laura Damon-Moore from the Library as Incubator Project. They'll speak in this order, and when all of them have finished, we'll begin some discussion and Q&A. Bill, over to you.
Are you missing some of the slides because we're sitting in front of them? Should we move over a little? You okay? I'm going to try to set up a timer here. I'm Bill Derry from the Westport Library, and I'm going to give a short presentation on some of the highlights of transformative events and challenges and discoveries on our journey with the Makerspace at the Westport Library. It began in April of 2012 with our first successful Maker Fair. There we go. And we opened up a 20-foot by 16-foot symbol of making in the library. It was just really a symbol because making happens all over our library, not just in that 20-foot by 16-foot space. And it was a symbol of moving from a place of consumption to a place of production, from a place of individuals borrowing things to places where tinkerers and makers could come together and share and thrive and connect. We began with the pipe structure. I mean, it's still the pipe structure, but it was empty when it started with one donated 3D printer. And it started with donated power tools and asking the community to come on in and build 2 airplanes, which are made out of wood, and they now hang in the Great Hall of our library. It was really symbolizing the flight of the imagination, the beginning of this imaginative journey into putting in a new participatory learning environment in the library. Then, over a year later, we received the IMLS National Leadership Award and expanded the makerspace, adding a design thinking center. We were so excited the design thinking center was going to be like a museum piece and it was going to be participatory. Well, you know, we talk about failure. This was an example of it didn't work out that way. What happened is it had too high a barrier to achieve early engagement. That's what we learned. I mean, if they have too high a barrier, who wants to spend the time learning about it? So what we did was we modified the Design Thinking Center. We changed the name of our makerspace. We are now the Learning and Discovery Center, which encompasses the makerspace. The Design Thinking Center has been expanded to include media production software, career and skill software, and our previous manager of public services is now titled the Manager of Learning and Discovery. Changing job titles can raise expectations and change roles. Now recently we had our 4th mini Maker Fair. And the first one, we thought 800 would show up, 2,000 showed up. We're up to 6,500 people. And we co-produced this with a sponsor who was on the Board of Education, came to us one day and said, I'd like to do a Maker Fair and use a room in your library. And we said, and we never say this, we said no. We said, we want to co-produce it with you and you can use the whole library. And it's history now. He raises the money to make this happen. So we get all the support through our partner. It costs about $25,000 to put this Maker Fair on at this point. And it's one of our needs assessments, and it's a mandate to provide ongoing making and participatory learning in the library. The beauty is many school systems now participate in this Maker Fair. Our Maker in Residence program brought in so many new audiences. Now each month we had a different maker as part of the IMLS grant. And it brought in audiences of artists and teens and aviators and seniors and entrepreneurs and scientists and more. Almost all of these makers have returned to do more workshops or presentations. Now the last one on the list is the refinery. 2 women run an entrepreneurial, an accelerator in which women entrepreneurs come and they spend 10 weeks, half-day workshops, looking at social media, angel investing, fundraising, board development, marketing skills, things that they need to go to the next level with their business. And then they end with a Shark Tank event. Our library staff attends all of these and provides mentoring and resources, including creating user groups. Expanding your audience to national and international levels increases local awareness, as you know, and local financial support. So when Maxine, our director, and I went to Russia to teach the Makers movement to 50 librarians, we ended up with a lot of visitations from other countries, and we also ended up with an intern from Malaysia who was an IT director who spent 3 months in our library working on a digitization project. One of the best outcomes has been the increased understanding of the value of intergenerational connections. Bradley, 12 on the left, made a viola, a makey-makey viola, and John, 88 on the right, made a makey-makey trumpet, and they worked together. In the middle, we have an 83-year-old and his granddaughter being trained by 12-year-old Miles. It's more about experience and knowledge than it is about achievements, degrees, and awards now. It's a flat world. We presented a week-long 3-credit Maker and Learning course at Southern Connecticut State University. One of the quotes that came out of it was, when I came here, I felt like I had a concrete around my brain, and through the week, it was crumbled and I can think again. Play causes an ability to think again, to think in new ways. Our library has become an incubator for school systems. Next week on Friday, we have a meeting with the superintendent of a school district in New York who already came and did a pre-visit, and now he's bringing back 2 principals and 4 teachers for a 2-hour group tour and a little bit of a workshop. And on Tuesday, we have a middle school coming with the principal and with a library media specialist and 6 teachers who are doing a 3-hour workshop. Every week we have 1 or 2 schools that are involved. We added robots. Oh my God, robots, robots. These Aldebaran robots have created a flurry of activity. We cannot have enough coding workshops. This runs on Choreograph, which is a proprietary software. We trained over 600 people on these robots. Our TEDx last week, no, actually 2 weeks ago, we've done 3 in an IMLS series. One on change, one on economic development, and the third one was on imagination. I'm telling you that they provide opportunities for communities to come together like nothing else. It's an opportunity for local people to craft that 18-minute story with a big idea worth sharing. It's an intense learning experience produced by our own community. Partnerships can be created by your makers. This is my closing slide. This would be an unusual sight in our library if you know our demographics. A group of Muslims engaged in an activity. I was surprised. I walked in on a Friday morning, and if the lady behind the printer is Mickey McCabe, worked with the blind all her life. Every Friday morning for 2 years, she comes to the library in the makerspace and produces items in books or math concepts for the blind. This group, the girl in red at the back is blind, and she was a former student, brought a group with her with Islamic material to try to convert some of it into 3D printed material. So, wrapping up, next week we have our final evaluation of the grant, and we're doing that typical pre and post survey, looking at changes in attitudes and awareness about making and participatory learning in the library. But I think it's the stories of transformation that we've collected that are more important and that really speak to the value of participatory learning in the library. Thank you. And now.
Wow, I mean, that's thrilling, Bill. Actually, if I could borrow the clicker. I wanted to just introduce myself quickly. Of course, I'm Todd Colegrove, University of Nevada in Reno, an academic library. Don't hold that against me. Earlier in the opening keynote, the comment was made about libraries and the IMLS support in particular of broad national impact. And it hadn't occurred to me before, but that is the business of libraries, isn't it? We are all about broad national impact, but on a very individualized, local, one person at a time level. So I'm honored to be here working with you guys, even if it seems like I may be preaching to the choir. Let's go ahead and have a look. So what we've got here, you may have seen this infographic or a piece of it from Falcon. It's really, their business is selling furniture about active learning, but this is part of the reality that we're dealing with, right? Something that we've all known and feared a bit. The long story short, and I can say this as someone that's taught for many years in the classroom, not a lot of learning goes on in the classroom, that we've got to actually get outside of that. And it's reflected in this infographic. 10% of what we read, we might remember, 20% of what we hear and so on. But you get down below that passive learning into the active learning, where we're talking about 70% of what they do and write, 90% of what they do, and that becomes part of them. What we need to be doing is actively supporting that. And this is what it looks like in the library, or in my library, where you've got some scary organic chemistry going on, similar sorts of higher order math here, but really what's happening is these kids are getting things out of their head, actively putting it on the wall in a very communal way where they can talk with one another about it, and they're learning. They're making this real. This is something that your average classroom professor or instructor doesn't see. This is what actual learning looks like, and it's kind of messy, which is good it's in our library. Another part of that where it crosses over into some of this new making equipment. 3D printing is an example. This was a student who just graduated this last year in biotechnology, fascinated with a particular type of DNA. In fact, if you're following any of the stories where they've been grafting in snippets of this DNA from a squid that fluoresces green under ultraviolet light, so you've got rabbits that fluoresce, their fur fluoresces green, or earthworms that fluoresce green. Sketchy stuff, right? But it's something that fascinated this kid, so much so that this biologist taught himself, using library resources, how to crosswalk a protein database file into an STL file. Took him 2 months, but he owns that now. That is part of him in a way that you can't take away. This actually, as he explained to me, that little snippet in the middle is the active bit. The part around the outside that looks like a beer can is just designed to keep water from tearing it apart. Now I know something that I never wanted to learn. Other examples would include chemical molecules. This was one of the first uses of some of the 3D printing that we had. I had a faculty member from chemistry come to me and say, after 3 years of working with this model on the two-dimensional screen, although in a three-dimensional modeling software, within 30 seconds of handling the physical printout and turning it over in his hand, he realized something that he never would have been able to do on the two-dimensional computer screen. He realized that the path that he was going down simply wasn't going to work. But he also realized a better direction that he could take it with. By his estimation, he shaved 5 years off his research just with that one capacity. Student over on the right, National Merit Scholar, who found out that we actually had acquired some handheld 3D scanners, promptly checked them out, and we hooked her up. She's been working with the Smithsonian researchers. They've been actively scanning fossils out in the desert. Kind of amazing stuff, learning on a level that simply couldn't happen without library participation. Other parts of it you'll see on this table, and my favorite part of this may or may not be the milk duds and the monster stickers. But you'll see, this is actually a shot right in the middle of the library, right in front of God and everyone. You've just got this mess of laser-cut styrofoam, robotic hovercraft coming together, spontaneously going away the next half hour. It's the sort of thing that happens. And in fact, I did say laser cutter. We've got a laser cutter right in the middle of the library where we're actively, and this has become easily the most heavily used technology outside of the whiteboards in the library. Where folks are taking that learning to another level. Now keep in mind that we're a science and engineering library, so what's happening is folks will learn about something in class, but they need to make it real so it can become part of themselves. Same sort of a thing with a 3D printer where they cross over this barrier where it's no longer this theoretical discussion in class or even a theoretical, pragmatic, I'm learning this on the whiteboard too. Now I need to engineer this and make this real and find out that I have to go through 8 different iterations to get the prototype right. It's exactly the sort of thing that we see happening. And this is a fundamental part because when these kids actually care about it, they are engaged in a way that you can't buy. And when they are engaged, they are not only learning, they're creating this. We actually have this wealth of innovation that's just coming out of this space. Yeah, there are Connects and Lego parts strewn around the academic library. And this, in case we're not at all clear, right out of the Makerspace playbook, this is what we're about. The reason why we got Makerspace in the library is to get them to a deeper, more engaged level. And when we do that, learning can happen that can't otherwise. I wanted to mention, Bill, you had mentioned sometimes there can be too high of a threshold to get in. Let me tell you a quick story about a student that was in that case. You'll all recognize Makey Makey and the approachability of Play-Doh. This is about a student who had been 2 years already enrolled as an undergraduate, was sort of floundering around, had no idea what direction he wanted to go with his program, made the mistake of talking with one of the librarians in the library. And before you know it, he had checked out a Makey Makey kit. He came back about a week later, unbeknownst to us, and checked out the Arduino Inventor kit. Then that came back about 3 or 4 weeks later, and he returned that and checked out the Raspberry Pi and the soldering iron kits and so on. And the next semester, I was hearing from this faculty member in engineering about this amazing kid that had all these mad skills when it came to programming and Arduino and soldering, and he had actually hired him into his lab. And in fact, this is how he taught himself, using library resources with just a modicum of help from the library folks, right? That's what we do. We find out what you geek, what you're really interested in, and then we feed that passion. Will's now about to graduate, and you see the robotics. One of his senior projects is that robotic arm that they built. And again, just as a reminder to all of us in the university, if you're in the land grant, this is our mission. Those 3 legs inform everything that we're doing. It's about learning, discovery, and the most important piece that sometimes we forget in the library is that outreach mission where you're working with the maker fairs, hackathons, startup weekend events, and so on. We'll get to the last slide, and I'll transition over then to my colleague. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Damon-Moore, and I am here in my capacity as the co-founder and manager of the Library as Incubator project. This is mainly a web-based project at this point. It's a storytelling platform. We highlight the ways that libraries can support the work of fine and creative artists through interviews and feature articles about art making that happens in libraries. There we go. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight a couple of elements of participatory learning that I think are particularly applicable to library spaces. It provides an opportunity for creativity, which you'll see more of in a moment, an opportunity for co-learning, so students and teachers are teaching and learning together. There's motivation and engagement happening through play. The things that they're learning are relevant to their interests and their identities. And we're providing a learning ecosystem where people make connections and think critically about themselves and their community and their world. All right, so the examples that I'm going to share today, since the Incubator project is a storytelling platform, so these are stories that we've heard from libraries about participatory learning opportunities. These examples are not site-specific, so they're not related to a permanent makerspace or learning lab necessarily. They promote lifelong learning. Each of them highlights a trend that the Incubator project has seen developing over the last couple of years in library programming. They are the result of careful and thoughtful collaboration, and they're not necessarily tied to technology, although they can be. The first example that I want to share is the Fluxus Club. This is at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. It's a collaboration with the Art Center's art librarian and an artist who was in the process of developing a series of workshops to extend an exhibition of Fluxus art called Art Expanded. The library offered to host an open house featuring its collection of Fluxus publications. And this grew into a regular, consistent partnership where the library could provide important historical context and meaning to ground the hands-on workshops that the artist was leading. The Fluxus art movement is difficult to explain to people, so the historical documents from the library, the catalogs, publications, things like that, plus the hands-on art-making component provided attendees with a well-rounded investigation of the exhibition and of the Fluxus movement itself. The trend that we're seeing here is meaningful and sustainable library and artist partnerships. Here we have a piece, it's a still from an animation that was produced as part of the interactive art trail at the Edinburgh Central Library in Scotland. Through this program, students from the Edinburgh School of Design were invited into the library to investigate different collections in the library and then to create new works of art based on research in those collections. The new artworks were then displayed around the library to form an interactive art trail where creative and visual interpretations of the library's holdings were available for any library visitor to view. The trend that we're seeing here is self-directed research and learning on the part of the design students. This is a really cool brand new program. It hasn't quite gotten off the ground yet in the UK. We're going to be featuring this on the site later this summer. It's called Library Takeover. And it's a different sort of program from making or hands-on art studio type of programs. The Library Takeover groups teams of middle and high school students with professional theater artists and arts administrators. Working in these teams, students and mentors will brainstorm, plan, and facilitate large-scale creative programs, such as concerts, performances, poetry slams, that will take place in library branches. So it's a different sort of output, but there's obviously lots of hands-on learning happening and a lot of real-world application. Plus, these students are able to network with professionals in possible career fields for them in the future. So the trend that we're seeing here is professional development for youth happening. Okay. So this program here, Let's Get Lost, Finding Inspiration in the Library Stacks, is a program that happens through the Bubbler program at Madison Public Library. It's Madison's Maker and Arts Programming Suite. So many libraries, of course, host writers groups and even writing workshops, but I'm particularly drawn to this one, which is led by poet Rita Mae Reese for the Bubbler. I like it because it ties the act and the art of poetry directly to the library where the workshop is taking place. So attendees get training on how to use their library in a unique and special way as inspiration for a new creative project. And they arm themselves with a new creative tool for future poetic endeavors. So they'll have a new and exciting lens through which to view any library that they visit in the future. And the trend that we're seeing here is that this is a program tied closely to library collections, not just the library as a hosting space. And that is that.
I know that many of the panels today won't be using PowerPoints, but we thought that this arena is so visually oriented that you really needed to see some of the examples of the kinds of programs and projects that are out there. I hope you enjoyed that. And so now we're going to open it up for discussion, for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and someone will bring you a mic. We need you to use the mic since this is a webcast. Please state your name and your affiliation if you have one, and ask your question. Who's ready? Thank you. If you're directing it towards a specific individual, please mention that. Otherwise, any or all of our panelists will respond.
My name is David Lankus from Syracuse University. Impressive, wonderful stuff. Makes me smile a lot. But I'm just noticing that most of this is focused on what can happen in a library. I'm wondering if we can talk about how these kinds of participatory learning activities, how the library can support that in the place where it's occurring, in the classroom, in the K-12 classroom, in the community elsewhere, in the art center down the street, et cetera.
Well,
Go ahead.
often we go out to schools. We are, as I said, we're kind of incubators for makerspaces in schools. So we bring some of our kits and we go out and we look at what they're doing already in the school and just suggest some activities, some STEM activities, some creative drama activities which go along with STEM to me. This group that's coming from New York, we already went to their space. They're coming now, we went to their space first, now they're coming back. We've gone to senior centers. We're going, part of our grant obligation for our robots is to go to areas outside of Westport which may not be able to afford these robots. So we're going into Bridgeport to the Boys and Girls Club to teach programming and get them excited about the robots. We also we're open at our library, but it's too far away for some of them to get there. So we've started. We could certainly do more. I mean, the Maker Fair is, we have a huge tent outside, so it's like outside our library, but we interact with so many people who through the year are not from our library. Like for the National Maker Fair coming up, when we're part of the state maker, we created our own collaborative, And so we have a Google Hangout that we talk to everybody, the 6 other makerspaces in Connecticut. So we're connected to them. They are not library makerspaces. I mean, we see ourselves as different, but boy, do we need those makerspaces for teachers. And they come into the library and they're not regular library users, but they are now.
And I'd have to jump in and say you're absolutely right, that the learning happens where our customers are, where the people are engaged with this stuff. And that's where many of the examples that you saw were pictures of things in the library where I caught them in the library. Caught them almost as if it's a bad thing. But the reality of it is that's why we have lendable technologies. I mean, that's why you can check out an Arduino or a $25,000 handheld scanner. It's because there's an explicit understanding that you need to take this where you're working and to make that real. I wanted to mention that, Laura, you mentioned a very powerful word. One thing that we'll see more of is this co-working, this co-learning space. And our communities often use the space of the library as a place to co-learn, but that doesn't mean that that's the only place where it happens. In fact, I have the warped perception that the library is wherever our customers are. You know, it has very little to do with the physical building itself. It just happens to be that's where we check things in and out.
And one thing that we didn't really talk about was digital resources and sort of meeting our customers where they are, and often that's online. And I think that's another thing to consider as well.
Hi, I'm Mary Stansberry, University of Denver, and I'm interested in how, or what are some of the challenges that you've seen or think are out there when it comes to evaluating the effectiveness of your work?
That is a definite challenge, especially at the end. I pointed out that this survey is going to do the typical counting, and we're going to have a, pre and post. But it's the transformations and the stories. We have 15 videos on transformation that we put up on the website because we think it's the stories. They just take too long. We're not. How do you pass all those stories along unless you record them in some way? So that's been one way that we have affected understanding of the change that's taking place.
And I would jump in and say from the academic library standpoint, one of the biggest challenges that we have right out of the gate is just defining what those metrics are. We get so hung up in some of our traditional metrics that we ignore this giant elephant. And the reality of it is higher ed is designed around the not necessarily correct assumption that all learning takes place in the classroom. And so it's puzzling to our upper administrators. We were asked, wanting to explore learning in spaces outside of the classroom. In fact, we have to tap dance through a minefield to avoid, irritating folks. That said, what we've got right now are a lot of very anecdotal measures, and anecdotal measures that we see regularly in the folks that are learning this stuff and using our resources in the library is that the larger problem is that they get hired into jobs before they've even graduated because they are so head and shoulders above their peers. That's not the kind of metric you want to be reporting to your provost, but it is something that points us in a direction.
I'd like to comment that I think we need to think very broadly about assessment here, and it isn't just about the numbers, although having this striking number of people coming to a public library sponsored and broader maker fair is certainly of interest, and it's of interest how many of them then come back to the library to use other resources as well as the makerspace. But I would say turn anecdotes into case studies and do it more systematically. So think about qualitative research and do a genuine study, capturing the voices on video, in interviews, and get that data. There's some things, for example, in a survey you'll ask various questions, but there are some things that we've heard you can't anticipate. You can't state that one of your goals for your makerspace is to have someone save 5 years on his research project. And yet it's extremely important to report a finding like that. And so we need to think very broadly about how we do assessment.
If I may, I would jump in and say, this sounds like a job for any of the ARLs that happen to be in the room. University of Nevada, Reno is not at all an ARL. We've got a total of 4 librarians in my library and 2 more paraprofessional staff and about 18 student workers. We've got all we can handle, just keeping things rolling. But what needs doing are those case studies to actually flesh it out and tell the story in a larger way.
Susan Benton with the Urban Libraries Council. Great presentations, and thank you. I've got actually 2 questions for you. One, how have you gone about getting your staff transitioned to being very active in this activity? And so just wanted to hear about any good ideas that you have on that, or how people inside the library are coming into making that transition from being more passive to active. And the second one is, boy, this is so exciting, and I can't imagine any local leader, both on the government side as well as the business side, that wouldn't be excited about the kind of innovation that's occurring through the library. And how are you connecting with your local leaders?
I'd like to jump on that one, actually. How did we get our staff active? I was named into my library the head of the library about 5 years ago, and it was a very traditional library. The phrase that I used for it and that my staff and student workers now use is going under the bus. You know, it's just a firm, you're the sponsor, you want to see this happen, so you just have to firmly support it, which is not to back up and say, okay, I'm going to enable you to give me all the reasons why you can't figure out how to do a 3D printing job. Instead, you just say, I know it's hard, and let's go under the bus. Let's figure this out. And in my case, shame works up really well, right? I mean, so what I've got is, again, you've got 18 student workers, and they all know how to do this, and they're kids, right? Surely you can figure out how to do this. You're a pretty highly trained person. Actually, I say that only partially tongue-in-cheek. It doesn't have to be said, but even unsaid, it's a powerful motivator. The other part of it is just in holding that expectation that our job in the library is not to keep this service desk company, or warm for that matter. Our job is to be actively mixing around. I keep telling my folks, your job is to inject energy and enthusiasm and to be listening and overhearing, because to the extent that we can connect these members of our community with the library resources that they need, then we're doing the work that we need to be doing. And by doing that, it's not rocket science. If you get a bunch of bright people in this area and you bounce them off one another and you tool them up with resources, they start innovating and creating things. And in fact, just this past month, my library was named the most innovative space by the Economic Development Authority of the western part of the region, in direct recognition of the fact that they've been seeing more jobs, more startups, more intellectual property, more new ideas coming out of that space than anything across the entire region. And it's like, you know, I'm not going to get in trouble for that, am I? This is our job. This is what we should be doing.
In terms of training staff, that is not easy. But we dug in right away. There was interest in the idea of making, and we had Westport Reads, which was our, One Town Reads, and it was an Amelia Earhart book. So we started with making paper airplanes and flying paper airplanes at staff meetings and looking at how far they went and how good they looked. Then nothing says you're not that things are changing more than having a group of librarians do soldering.
Right.
So we pulled out the soldering irons. We got the LED lights. We discussed that it's sort of a foundation kind of a operation for making, and they loved it. Now it's taken, we're in our second year, and through the Makers in Residence and through the workshops, so many staff members have understood it better by watching things happen and change. And we have probably 4 who are totally immersed in this. Our teen librarian is running so many maker programs. And our digital manager of digital experience manages the robots. He was an interesting person. He came from the World Wrestling Federation. But he's also a children's author and an editor. So he's got a mixed bag. But as things as people get added onto the staff and as people get changed by STEM activities, they start doing them. It's a slow process.
I would also say just see if there's a way that you can promote participatory learning for your staff, not just for your patrons. So all of these things that we've been talking about, creativity, co-learning, motivation and engagement, relevant to their interests and their identities, the more you can promote that to your staff, I think the more they'll get excited and want to do the same for their patrons.
Well, and I think a fundamental fear that I've seen among the staff that were, the more reluctant they were to change, the more they were afraid that all of this high tech was making them irrelevant. And so you're absolutely right, to the extent that you can bridge that gap. I mean, just have a 3D modeling workshop using something like Tinkercad online. I mean, it's not that hard to do. And once they do it, they're empowered. It's like, holy heck, I might be able to do all this stuff. And then they're on board. Then your most, what I found again and again is that your most powerful allies started out as your harshest critics. You just have to convert them.
Environment of play.
Yeah, our director, when we first started, added play to our monthly reports as a category that we had to look at in our work to see what did we do that was playful. So, and that was just a way for us to focus on the fact that we do have it, but we don't usually call it play, and maybe we need to make room for it.
That's really interesting. Next, Catherine.
Catherine Skinner, Educopia Institute, and I'm curious, I mean, I'm sold. I think the things that you guys are doing are absolutely fantastic, and they match a lot of the other things that I've heard about, kind of makerspace and innovation, lab, experimentation. What I'm interested in actually piggybacks a little bit off of what Joan was saying a few minutes ago about the case study kind of approach. And what I worry about is resources, because resources are always scant, and grant resources can only take so many so far. How do we start to incorporate this more systematically into libraries and into library partnerships? And do you have any advice for groups that that might not have grant funding ready for this? How do you start to make the case for making this part of the permanent budget?
Well, I know Rotary clubs, they love making in libraries, and they've been very supportive in our library. They gave us our first 3D printer. So community organizations like that could support, especially if you, like our 3D printer goes out. You mentioned, David, in the community, we go to all kinds of festivals. So we were at the Blues, Views, and Barbecue Festival, and we had our maker space outside under a tent, and actually that's when the governor came, and he ended up in our maker space because of the Blues, Views, and Barbecue Festival. Yep. But it is partnerships and finding ways to get that one thing funded. We're also looking at lots of inexpensive ways. Lots of libraries are doing $30 science activities, and they're just experiments, and kids get white coats and they dress up as scientists during that program. So I think there are less expensive ways to get into the game, and there are partners that you could get that will help support some of the more expensive things that you might want.
And I couldn't agree more. I mean, the bulk of all this making stuff, I mean, making and STEM outreach can happen for little to no dollars, period. But one of the things that we tend to overlook is how much more effective an engaged staff and an engaged community is. I mean, the dirty little secret in my library's case, I mean, we grew the use of that facility as space by over 1,000% over the course of 5 years. We didn't have, this was at the time that we were, when the governor was, I mean, we were actually cutting entire programs, laying off tenured faculty and making national news. So there was no budget. At the same time, we also moved all the books, the 53% of the printed and bound books, because they were the print journals that people didn't want to access in person anymore, up to the automated retrieval system without any additional staff. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've gained only 1/2 of one staff position. But I would say we're still far more engaged. I mean, I was looking at a story, not a story, but a research study here just in the last week. It turns out if you a survey of all of the traditional organizational structures, 1 out of 5 employees is engaged. In terms of these new activities, that means that by definition, you've got 80% capacity that's going wasted. So we tend to be penny wise and pound foolish. We're sitting here saying, I need more funds and more staff and more bureaucracy to make this happen. when really what you need is to incorporate perhaps play into your monthly reports. Get them engaged in what they're doing, and beyond that, once they've got an engaged community in your staff, that community includes the members that come into the library, because they start helping one another too.
One other thing I want to mention is shared resources. So my library system is very small. My day job is assistant director for a very small rural library in Wisconsin. And we have 7 libraries in our system. They applied for an LSTA grant to get a number of maker tools that each library can reserve and borrow and to facilitate programs there. And we use those things like crazy. You know, we just, I have a bunch of iPad minis at my library right now where we're doing stop motion animation workshops with a number of after-school groups. Once you're able to demonstrate that your community is passionate about something like that, I think that that really helps lay that foundation for being able to make the ask to other sponsors and partners.
I'd also comment that in many programs that I'm aware of that work with new technologies, they're sometimes seen by administrators or by other library staff as being the extra things and or the non-essential things. And so I think part of it is a reorientation of whether this is a core service that is a mainstream part of your program, which then leads to reallocation of resources. So many of the programs, not specifically Makerspace that I'm familiar with, do end up being reallocation of existing library resources because so few places are getting new money these days.
I would chime in to say that that's exactly what's happening in our case. In fact, we've just, over the course of the last year, almost all of the new equipment we've been adding has been funded directly from the Vice President of Research and Innovations office, because the library doesn't have the funds, but we've been receiving large injections of capital from a place that has not traditionally given money to the libraries. And so it definitely does work.
One thing that happened with us too is, number one, to demonstrate sustainability, we wanted to include in a line item in our budget something dealing with the makerspace, because for 2 years there was nothing in there. We were running on IMLS, we were running on donations. So a huge amount, well, 40,000, was put into a line item that now supports, but it's now in the budget, the yearly budget. So, and when we brought it to the Board of Finance, they already were so aware of the makerspace and what it was accomplishing in the community that they didn't hesitate. So I think it builds on its own success if the community wants it.
Sorry, but I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to ask one final question. And that is, what do you recommend to IMLS for specific funding priorities in participatory learning so that projects will have broad impact and not just have a beneficial effect on your own local situation? So I welcome Laura. We'll start with you.
Oh. Sure. So I think what I would love to see, and there might be a version of this already, but a train the trainers sort of program, whether that's through library systems or associations, but something, and it could be in person or online, but something that has an interdisciplinary component, where we're learning about participatory learning that's happening not just in libraries, but also museums, schools, learning labs and makerspaces that are not tied to a library, technology camps, art centers, things like that, really getting that cross-pollination happening. I think that can also help with future partnerships and collaborations as well. And something where we're able to see tangible examples, whether that's tours or actually attending programs or actually participating ourselves in workshops, where we're not just hearing about them, but we're actually seeing them in person and participating ourselves, possibly with a liaison component. So you train the trainers, and then they liaise with their system or their association after that.
Thanks, Laura. Todd?
I would well, number one, I want to applaud the support that the IMLS has done over the last several years in terms of directly enabling more STEM learning, more STEM outreach. As a scientist myself, we need more scientists and engineers. I would personally like to see an explicit acknowledgement of the fact that we're really dealing with STEAM if what we want is active learning. We want that engagement of art right in the middle of the scientists and the engineers. Otherwise, the right things don't happen. If you need an argument, just do a quick Google of the percentage of Nobel laureates that were also artists, and you'll find a substantial percentage. If we're really aspiring to support the higher order learning, we need to incorporate that. The other thing that I would encourage is that the active learning that's happening in our spaces, whether academic library, public library, school library, what's happening there when they're rapidly prototyping and iterating and creating a lot of things, particularly when there's artists and scientists and engineers running those, is you're innovating. You are now creating new ideas and things that never existed before. I would really suggest that to the extent that we can encourage fostering programs that will support the innovation and the entrepreneurship that's a natural outcome of this learning in those spaces, I think it would be a real win for the local and the national economies.
Well, I have too many, so I'm going to mention one. Having been a teacher for 35 years and in drama and education, integrated arts, library supervisor, and then moving to a public library, I realized that there's two kinds of oxygen that are breathed in each one. They're different. The schools are closed systems for so many reasons, and libraries are open systems. And I think that maybe if there was an initiative to allow schools to be the primary applicants and let them create the relationships with the partners rather than the other way around, it might be a way, because I think they're on the verge of change. I think things are happening that are both forcing it, and I think it could happen if schools were making these applications for partnerships that would involve participatory learning.
Thanks very much for those thoughts. I know that all of our speakers will be here through lunch and into the afternoon, so if you have additional questions, which I know you do, I hope you'll feel free to approach them and ask them individually. I hope you'll join me in thanking our terrific panelists for getting us off to a great start.